Hi all, and welcome to the introduction to the graphical display calculator. Now, you should all have a graphical display calculator. If you don't, I have got some downloaded software, but it doesn't do the full range of things. As you'll see, mine will look very different on the screen to what yours looks like at times, and also you won't obviously be able to take that into the exam with you, and believe me, they're going to save you a lot of time. So the first thing I want us to do is just get used to where the buttons are. Obviously there's a lot of buttons that you're used to using on your normal calculators, but they're in quite different places sometimes on the graphical display calculator. So I just want you to try out doing these 4 different calculations. So 5 squared, 8 times minus 3, 6 to the power of 4, and the inverse cosine of 0.214. Give that a go now. Pause the video while you do it, and then play it again afterwards, or if you come across any problems, and I'll try and explain what the different issues might be that you've come across. Okay, so to carry out 5 squared, it's quite simple. Obviously hit the 5 button, and then squared is this button here, like this, and then you hit enter, which is your equals button, and it gives you 25. Now you might have thought putting in 8 times minus 3 is a bit of a weird one to do with a calculator. It's fairly straightforward. However, you might have noticed that if you put in 8 multiplied by, and you use this minus here, minus 3, and you hit enter, you come up with an error. So if you hit enter again, that will get rid of that error, and this is what you need to do. 8 times minus this minus down here, 3. And that will give you your answer of minus 24. So if you ever need to put in a negative number, this is the minus to use. This one here is for calculations. Okay. 6 to the power of 4. Well, there's no power of 4 button here. We've only got to the power of 2 or the power of minus 1. So to do this, you need to put in your 6, and then we've got this little hat here, okay? And that is the to the power of. So you can do any number to the power of any other number. 6 to the power of 4. And that gives you your answer of 1296. Finally, you want your inverse cosine. So you might notice that above all of the buttons there's this writing in blue. That means that if you press this blue second button here, you'll get any of the functions written in blue. As well, if you have green, if you hit the green button here, you'll get any of the functions written in green. So the colours are associated. The inverse cosine is above normal cosine here, and it's written in blue. So to get to it, I need to hit my second button, and then you should see a little arrow to show that you've hit the second button, and hit cosine, and it gives you the inverse cosine with a bracket ready to go. 0.214. Close the bracket, hit enter, and you get your answer, 1.355. Okay. So that is just the basics of using your graphical display calculator. Obviously there will be other things as well. You can always ask me if you can't find a button, or there's plenty of YouTube videos out there as well for the simple things. Okay, next thing we need to do then. You need to know how to enter data on your calculator. So obviously we can normally enter data as it is on the screen here. You can put in your data. We could put in 5 plus 6 plus 2 plus 8 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 and find the total number of cupcakes that were eaten in 2 minutes. But the beauty of the graphical display calculator is that you can actually store data on it as a table. So if we go to here, to this button, Stat, we're going to use this button so much for statistics, strangely enough, given that it's called the Stat button. So you hit your Stat button. you come up with lots of different options. The first one here is to edit. So I'm just going to hit enter. And it gives us 3 different lists. You can use any list you want, it doesn't matter, as long as you remember which list you've used. And the most sensible one, obviously, would be to enter into list 1. So, I'm going to enter in my data. 5, and then hit the arrow to go down. 6, arrow to go down. 2. Now imagine I make a mistake, I put in 3 here. I don't want 3, I wanted 8. I've skipped ahead 1. So I'm going to go up and just hit clear. And then I'm going to put in my 8 instead. Okay, and that will change it. It won't change it unless you hit enter. So make sure that you hit enter in between. 3, 4, and 5. There we go, so all of my data is now in there. What I can do now, I can do lots of different things with this data. One of the things I can do is go back onto stat like this, and I can sort it. So I can hit enter here, and I can ask it to sort list 1. So we look for L1 here. It's blue, so I need to hit the second button, L1. Close the brackets, enter, and it's done. So now if I go back into stat and edit, my list should now be in order. There we go, perfect. Okay, so now we've got our data in a list, what are we going to do with it? Well, one of the most straightforward things to do is probably to calculate the mean, the median and the quartiles, and something called standard deviation. Now we'll talk about what the standard deviation actually means in a little while, but most importantly is just being able to do this. So we're going to go back to stat again. This time, instead of going to edit or to sort, we're going to go across to calc. Now there's lots of different calculations you can do here. Here you've got your equation of a straight line. You've got your median to median. But what we want at the moment are these stats. And most importantly, the one variable stat, because we're only looking at one variable here. We're only looking at the number of cupcakes that were eaten in 2 minutes. So I'm going to hit enter on my one variable stats. Now, your setup might look slightly different to this depending on which calculator you're using. I'm going to tell the calculator that I want to use one variable stat on my L1, and I'm going to hit enter. And it comes up with this list here, which you can see as well on the PowerPoint. This first one here, the X with the line across the top, we call it X bar. X bar is the mean, so this is the mean value. So the average number of cupcakes eaten in 2 minutes was 4.71. You can also see the sum, the total number of cupcakes that were eaten in 2 minutes was 33. Here, this little O, this is what we were talking about, the standard deviation. So there's a standard deviation of 1.83. And that's how much the data ranges from the mean. That is the spread of the data from the mean. You can see how many students there were, the number of students in total eating cupcakes. You can see the minimum number eaten was 2. And then if we keep scrolling down, we get this information. So the minimum number of cupcakes eaten in 2 minutes was 2. Someone wasn't very hungry. The maximum number was 8. So someone was really keen on eating some cupcakes there. The median number was 5. Now this is going to be helpful for if you want to start drawing things like box plots. Okay, so you're going to use your median for that. And then we have these 2 quartiles, 3 and 6. So the lower quartile is 3 and the upper quartile is 6. Now these directly relate to what you can see on the screen here. The median is the middle bar. So that will be at 5. Q1 here is at 3. Q3, this end of the box here, is at 6. Then we've got our bottom bar at 2 and our upper bar at 8. So you can get all of that information on a box plot here. Okay, so now you must be thinking, well, how do I make a box plot on a calculator? That's not a normal thing to be able to do with a calculator, but with your GDC you can actually plot loads of different types of graph. And the box plot, or box and whisker plot, is one of the things that you can do. And it's really useful. So if we look up here in blue, there's something called the stat plot, which is what we want. So we're going to go ahead and go to the stat plot by clicking second and stat plot. And this brings you all of these, so you can make all of these different plots all at the same time, which means you can put loads of data in, which is really useful. But at the moment they're all switched off, and we want them, well, we want one of them, just stat plot 1, to be switched on. And we need to change, because it's at the moment set up to be a scatter graph, so we want to change the settings on it. So while we've got 1 highlighted, and you can change which one's highlighted, we're going to keep it on 1. We'll hit enter, and that gives you all of these different options. Now at the moment it's flashing here on, but you can see that off is selected. So we're going to hit enter and move that to on. Here we've got lots of different types of graph that you can make, okay? And the type of graph that we want is this one here. Okay, this is the box and whisker plot here. Now there is another one here, and you can see these little dots, and these are outliers. So outliers are basically data that doesn't fit within the standard deviation expectations of your graph. But for math studies you don't need to worry about outliers. What you do need to worry about is this one here. So we're going to go down, and then in order to stay on type you need to use the arrow keys. So you just scroll along using the arrow keys like this until you're on the correct graph and hit enter. Then we need to make sure that we tell it that the data is in list 1, which it already knows. If you were using a frequency table, which we're not at the moment but we will look at, you would change this. But at the moment we are not doing that, so we just leave it set to 1. And now everything is set up. Now if I hit graph, hopefully, it shows me my box plot. And it also shows me all of the x and y axes, which for a box plot isn't particularly useful. Really what we want it to look like is this down here. So if we go to zoom and then we scroll down, there's lots of different zoom options. You can zoom into the box, you can just zoom in, you can just zoom out. You don't need to worry about these ones at the moment. But if we go down to 9, we get to zoom stat, which means zoom in to the statistics that you've just used. I'm going to click enter, and immediately it zooms into the part of the graph where my box is. So now it's much clearer what that box looks like. So if you were ever asked to sketch a box plot, you could do it like this. But obviously even in a sketch you want to be able to put values in. So you can choose to either read the values from here and add them on, or if you're not sure where they should go, you can click this button here, which is trace. And trace will put a little dot on your graph, and at the bottom it will tell you what each value means. So here, this line here is the median, and it's at 5. If I scroll along, Q1, the first quartile, is at 3, which we know from here. Q1 is 3, median is 5. Scroll along again, the minimum value is at 2. We knew that from here, the minimum value was 2. Scroll along again, Q3, the upper quartile, is at 6, and and the maximum value is at 8. So you can either choose to use the statistics that you have made on your calculator and draw your own box plot, or if you need a little bit of help or a reminder, or you just want to check and make sure you're getting it right, put on your box plot. It'll only take a second to do, trace it and follow the points across. Okay, now that you've seen how to do that, it's your turn. So here I've got some information about Smarties, and the Smarties are being put into a bag depending on what colour they are. So you split up all your Smarties and each colour goes into a different bag. Be careful, the key at the bottom here, read it very, very carefully. Always read carefully if there's a key on tables. I'd like you to practice putting the data into a list on your calculator, finding the mean number of Smarties in the bags, finding the median number, the upper and lower quartiles, and if you can, the interquartile range, which is the difference between the upper quartile and the lower quartile, which you should just be able to do in your head or as a calculation on paper. Find out which bag had the least and which bag had the most. You should be able to do that just by looking at the data in the table. And then finally, I'd like you to draw a box plot using your calculator and then sketch it onto paper with the values in the correct places. Now what you are going to need to know before you can put in your data is how to clear the data that you've already got. And there's a quick way of doing it. Rather than scrolling through each data point and clearing, if you go to Stat and you go back to Edit again, which will bring up your lists, and here we've got all of the data. We could go through and just clear each data point individually, but that's going to be a real faff when you're starting to work with more numbers. So if you just go up and highlight L1, and it shows you all the values that you've got in L1, and you hit clear here, it looks like it hasn't done anything, but when you hit enter, all of that data is gone and you're ready to enter in your new data. Now, like I said, you can enter it into any of these lists, but you must remember which one you've used, and realistically using L1 is the best way to do that. We will use the other lists later, but for now let's just focus on L1. So give it a go, see how you get on, and let me know if you have any problems.